one of the things that I wanted to make sure that you guys knew, my kids, if you guys take pictures or anything like that, or if you please will take pictures of your kids while they're doing this, you can text them to me or just send them over to me on email, and we can make sure that those go out for publicity, because that's one of the things that we were looking to do, and we'll be heading in that direction probably at the end of this call, because we've already had some information from people that want to share in the excitement, make sure that it works first. So I wanted to, I know that we don't have video, and that was the challenge for today, was that we basically have to sit here for another 20 minutes while we wait for the space station start time. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure that your volume is all the way down, because we'll end up with feedback loops. Or don't watch it at all, because it'll be recorded. I wanted to share with you guys, while we were waiting, a story called Opossum's Man to the Moon, The Eagle Has Landed. And it actually turned out to be a good book to share because, one, it's for outer space, two, it was in my basement, and three, it doesn't have a whole lot of pictures. So we're actually not missing anything. So this is about a little possum, and his name is Opie, and he goes on all of these different adventures and things like that. He's got a little boy that he lives near, so he sometimes tags along.
Please turn all the lights on in the kitchen.
Here is...
The ones behind me, don't turn the ceiling lights on.
On the edge of a small northern town, there was a forest. The year was 1969, and a possum was waking up to a warm night on the edge of Washington, D.C. The moon was shining lightly over the forest, giving it a warm glow. Opie was hanging quietly by his long pink tail from his favorite tree above the ground, because remember, he's a possum, so he hangs upside down. And Opie woke up. He untangled his tail and sat up on the branch. He stretched out his furry arms and put his little pink paws high in the air. He opened his mouth and let out a long, loud yawn. Opie looked up at the clear night sky and saw that there was a full moon. The stars seemed to be shining brighter than normal. Opie loved to look up at the sky. Many nights he would lie awake and wonder what else was out there in the sky with the moon and stars. Opie decided that he would try counting all of the stars in the sky. There sure are a lot of stars in the sky, said Opie. I wonder if I can count them all in one night. He quickly climbed to the highest tree branch that he could find. He began to count all of the stars. 1, 2, 3, Opie said as he began counting the stars. 101, 102, 103, continued Opie. As Opie counted the stars, he noticed something moving across the sky. I wonder what that is, thought Opie. Possums can see excellently at night, so he carefully watched the object. As the strange object continued moving across the sky, he noted that it appeared to have a round front with a tail behind it. Opie figured out what it was. That's a comet, said a very proud Opie. As Opie watched the comet shooting across the sky, he realized it was traveling at the direction of the boy's home. He began thinking about his friend the boy and his family. He realized that it had been a while since he had last seen them. Opie took another look at the stars. He tried his best to remember the ones that he had counted. The rest of the stars will have to wait for another time, said Opie. It's time for another adventure. I'm off to see the boy and his family. With that, Opie began climbing down the tree until he reached the soft ground below. He began walking through the forest towards the boy's home. Opie traveled through the forest, only stopping briefly to play with his furry woodland friends. Opie traveled all night. He finally came up to the edge of the forest and was at the edge of the boy's backyard. Opie was tired from his long journey and took a moment to rest. He raised his furry snout and looked up at the sky. The sun was rising high. Opie always enjoyed watching the sunrise and the beautiful colors in the sky. Opie began making his way through the tall green grass until he made it to the boy's back porch. From the back porch, Opie could hear lots of noise coming from inside. He was a very curious possum and wanted to know what was going on. Opie climbed the porch step and quietly made his way over to the window. Opie put his pink paws up on the windowsill so he could get a better look at what was going on, but he could not see too much through the dirty windows. I must know what's going on in there, thought Opie. Opie crawled over to the back door. he saw that it was cracked open. Opie was very cautious because he didn't want to be seen. He poked his furry head inside to take a look around. As he looked around, he saw that the boy and his family were walking out of the room. Opie decided it was safe, and he crawled inside. "Are you packed and ready to go?" asked the boy's father. "Yes," replied the boy and his mother as they grabbed their bags. "I wonder where they're going," thought puzzled Opie. "Wherever it is, I want to go too." Opie heard the front door open and quickly close. He knew that he didn't have much time. He ran out the back door, pulling it closed with his pink tail. As he ran around to the front of the house, the boy and his family were already in the car. They were about to leave on their trip. Opie watched carefully. As the boy's father turned to finish loading up the trunk of the car, Opie ran as fast as he could and jumped into the back of the trunk. He quickly hid himself under some bags before the boy's father knew what happened. "They will never find me in here," Opie thought to himself as he quietly chuckled. The boy's father loaded up the last bag and closed the trunk. The boy's father then started up the car, and they were off. Opie was very tired from his long journey and quickly fell asleep. After a short nap, Opie woke up. When he woke up, he realized that the car had stopped. The boy and his family were getting out of the car. Opie got out from under the bag and began to follow them, making sure that he was not seen. Opie saw that they were walking towards a large stone building with lots of windows. He did not have any idea where he was. "Is this the NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C.?" the boy asked his father. "Yes, it is," replied the boy's father. "Do you remember what NASA stands for?" "NASA," thought Opie. "I've never heard of that before. I wonder what it is." The boy thought long and hard. "NASA stands for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration," said the boy. "Very good," replied the boy's father. "Do you remember what NASA does?" Opie was a very curious possum. He listened very carefully because he wanted to learn all about NASA. "NASA is a program that studies the planets, stars, and space," replied the boy. "They're trying to put a spacecraft and people into outer space." Opie's eyes opened really wide. He had always wondered what it was like in outer space. "I hope one day people can go to outer space and that I can go too," thought Opie. The boy and his family walked through the door and entered the NASA headquarters. Once inside, they began making their way down a long hallway. At the end of the hallway, they came to a large room. There were already many people inside. The boy and his family quickly took a seat towards the back of the room. Opie quickly followed close behind. Opie found an open chair in the back of the room, and he sat down. A man came out and began talking to the crowd. As he talked, 3 other men sat behind them. "Who are those people?" wondered Opie. "As you know," said the man, "the United States is in a space race with the Soviet Union to see who can be the first person to put a spacecraft in space. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik. Sputnik was the first man-made satellite to be put into space. The United States launched their first satellite 4 months later." Opie listened carefully. He was very excited when he heard that animals could also go into space. "Maybe I can go to space one day too," thought Opie. On April 12, 1961, continued the man, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin made the first orbit around the Earth. He became the first person to travel in space. And on May 5, 1961, astronaut John Shepard became the first American in outer space. Earlier this month, President John F. Kennedy issued a challenge to NASA and the American people to go to the moon. He challenged us with going to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. As you can see, continued the man, the United States and the Soviet Union have come a long way in their space travels. It's important that we meet President Kennedy's challenge and be the first country to put a man on the moon. The reason that you all are here is that we're asking for your help in this mission. Your skills are valuable to the Apollo program. The mission that you will be working on is called Apollo 11. The astronauts who have been assigned to this mission are Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. We will be sending you all to the Space Center in Cape Kennedy, Florida. The astronauts stood up and saluted everyone. Everyone also stood and clapped loudly. Once the meeting was over, the boy and his family headed for the car and began their long drive to Cape Kennedy, Florida. After several days of driving, they had finally arrived at Cape Kennedy. The boy's father went quickly to work to help the astronauts prepare for their mission, while the boy and Opie studied all of the space equipment around the facility. They looked at the rockets, modules, equipment, and uniforms that the astronauts wore. Opie loved every minute of it. This went on for several days until it was time for Apollo 11 to launch. The day for Apollo 11 to go into outer space finally arrived, and in the morning hours of July 16, 1969, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins prepared for their trip to the moon. The three astronauts began putting on their spacesuits. Opie did not want to miss this. She quietly sneaked into the room to watch them prepare for their mission to space. Each spacesuit was white and was very heavy. The suits had special moon boots and gloves. They also had controls for oxygen and temperature. The suits came with an oxygen tank that was attached to the back of the suit. There was also a microphone, lights, and television camera attached to the helmet in the suit. The helmet came with a special gold-coated shield that would block out the sunlight when it got too bright. Finally, the suits had a special mission patch that said Apollo 11. The patch had an eagle landing on the moon and the Earth in the background. As Opie watched the astronauts get ready for their mission, he began looking around the room. He saw one of the suits that was used to send the chimpanzees to outer space. Opie wanted to see what it was like to be an astronaut. He walked over to the suit and put it on. It almost fit him perfectly. He had to cut a little hole in the back of the suit so that his long pink tail could hang out. Once he put on the suit, he stood very quietly so that no one would notice him. Opie even found an extra mission patch and put it on his suit. Once the astronauts were dressed, they began their walk towards the spaceship. Opie quietly followed behind them. It was hard for Opie to walk with the big heavy suit on, but he still managed to follow them without being noticed. The astronaut arrived at the large Saturn V rocket that would take them into outer space. On top of the rocket were two smaller ships. They were called the Columbia and the Eagle. While the astronauts stopped to wave at the crowd of people who were there to watch the launch, Opie ran ahead of them and made his way into the spaceship. He found a small space to hide inside the ship. Soon after Opie was inside, the astronauts entered the Columbia. There was not much space. The astronauts had to sit sideways and lie on their backs. Buzz Aldrin sat in the middle, with Armstrong on the left and Collins on the right. The engineers helped to strap the astronauts into their chairs. Opie quickly wrapped his long pink tail around one of the objects in the module. While the astronauts and Opie were preparing for launch, Mission Control in Houston, Texas began the launch sequence. Once the sequence was completed, Mission Control radioed the astronauts. Apollo 11 is go for launch, said Mission Control. Roger that, replied Armstrong. Roger that, said Opie quietly. At 9:32 a.m., the countdown began. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, liftoff! And the large rockets were ignited and began to lift the spaceship into the air. The boy and his family watched excitedly from the ground as the spaceship was now soaring through the sky. Opie was so excited that he could not contain himself. He yelled, "Whee!" at the top of his lungs. Luckily, the rockets were so loud that no one could hear him. As the rocket hurled towards the atmosphere, it began to release some of its parts so it could travel faster in space. After soaring in the air for 12 minutes, the spaceship was now 100 miles above Earth. And when we look at our space station, the space station is about 150 miles, so he's actually only about 50 miles from the International Space Station where it would end up being. The astronauts and Opie had now left the Earth's atmosphere and entered into outer space. Once they were in space, the Saturn V rocket released the Columbia and the Eagle modules that had left Earth behind and were now on their way to the moon. Once they were in space, the astronauts were free to move around in space modules. When they unhooked themselves from their seats, they were weightless and began to float around. Opie thought it was funny and tried it too. He untied his tail and began to float around. Opie was having the time of his life. He began doing flips and flying through the air. He moved into one of the windows so that he could see the blue and white planet. He knew that it must be Earth. It looked so tiny to him since it was so far away. As he was flying around the ship, his stomach began to growl. He looked around for some food. He found a container with food in it. He found granola bars, nuts, fruit, and some meat. All of the food was in pouches. When he opened a pouch to eat it, the food began floating in the air. Opie went chasing after it. He ate every last bite. Opie was so full that he let out a big burp. Opie was then tired and wanted to take a nap. He tied his tail around one of the latches and fell asleep. Instead of hanging upside down by his tail, he was now hanging above his tail. Opie thought that this was silly, but was too tired to move and quickly fell asleep. After several days of space travel, Opie began to wonder if they could ever make it to the moon. On July 20th, 1969, Opie and the astronauts arrived at the moon. They were hovered directly over it. Opie looked out the window and he could see it. He was very excited. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were getting ready to move into the Eagle so that they could climb down to the moon, while Michael Collins would wait for them in the Columbia. As Opie saw them coming to the Eagle, he quickly found a place to hide under one of the storage units. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin released the Eagle from Columbia, and then they were on their way to the surface of the moon. They landed at the Sea of Tranquility. Neil Armstrong radioed Mission Control. "Houston," said Neil Armstrong, "Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Neil Armstrong then climbed down the Eagle and took his first steps onto the moon. As Armstrong took his first steps on the moon, he looked down and could see his footprints on the gray dust of the moon's surface. Buzz Aldrin also climbed down the Eagle onto the moon's surface, and Opie was not far behind. Armstrong radioed back to Earth and said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." "And for possums everywhere," said Opie quietly, as he took his first steps on the moon. Astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin began doing experiments and collecting samples of moon rocks to take back to Earth. Opie also wanted to help out, so he began collecting moon rocks. He bounced on the moon's surface from rock to rock. He did all of this while managing not to be seen, which was not easy to do on the moon. It was almost time for the astronauts to leave. Before they left, they planted a flag with a plaque that said, "We came in peace for all mankind." Armstrong, Aldrin, and Opie climbed back into the Eagle and joined the Columbia that was still hovering above the moon. The astronauts climbed back into their seats in Columbia. They fired their engines and were back on their way to Earth. After a long journey through space, the Columbia began its way through the Earth's atmosphere. As it began falling towards the Atlantic Ocean, large parachutes opened to slow its descent. The Columbia landed safely in the water. As the astronauts were helped out of the Columbia module, they were taken back to land. Opie was hiding in the storage unit with the moon rocks that was taken with the astronauts. Once they arrived, they were greeted by everyone. The boy and his family were there excitedly watching history being made. They were all heroes for the entire world. After their long journey, Opie was ready to go back home. He packed up his things and hid it in the back of the trunk of the boy's car. After several days of driving, they were finally home. The boy and his family unpacked the car and went inside their home. Opie began to climb out of the trunk when he noticed something sitting there. It was a moon rock and his mission patch. Opie wondered how they had gotten there. Did someone know that he was on the moon? He would never know. Opie fondly grabbed his moon rock and put the patch over his fur, wearing it proudly. Opie walked around the back of the boy's home and took one final look inside. He quietly said goodbye to the boy and his family. He turned and headed back to his home in the forest. As he walked, the sun set and the moon and the stars were now visible. Opie smiled as he looked up at the stars. He began counting. 1, 2, 3, said Opie, as he looked at the sky on the way back to his forest home. And that's the end of our story. That was A Possum's Man on the Moon. The Eagle has landed, and it's written by Jamie M. Long. He's a local author from the Virginia area. And we are at about 9:12, so we have a few more minutes before we move on to the next part. Does anybody have any comments as far as Opie and his story? I know that this was from 1969, but lots of it was from outer space type stuff and all of the stuff that our astronauts are actually up there doing now. Does anybody else have thoughts about it? You're welcome to talk.
This is James. How many stars were there?
I don't know. He only counted up to 102 before he gave up and decided he had to go check things out.
Oh. Was it based on a true story, or was it made up?
This is based on a true story. This is the Apollo 11 race to the moon that was the space race that was happening in the 1960s. And all of the stuff, actually, that Mr. Long writes is, I guess, would be considered historical fiction. Opie obviously was not there for it, but the information that he shares is real.
Okay.
What else? Are you guys excited?
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. Are we doing our second questions? Yes.
Yes. Yes, you'll end up doing all of your questions when we get to it.
Okay.
Because we have done lots of practices. This is going to be the real thing now. And you guys probably, if you don't have YouTube on, which you really shouldn't, if you go back and look, you'll be able to see that what we're really waiting for right now is for the space station to be close enough to us so that they can finally hear us. Because one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that in order to hear the space station, it has to be near us or directly over us. In this case, it has to be directly over Fred's station. And as soon as it gets close enough so that basically our radio signal can hear their radio signal, then we'll be able to start talking with them. And that's kind of the cool part, because the space station is directly above us. Well, would be directly above the station that'll be in the middle of it.
Okay, go fast.
And the cool part is that there's nothing between...
Go anyway, because we're going to have to go right in the middle of it, I'm sure.
There's nothing between us and the sky, which makes it a little bit easier to communicate, because when we're here on Earth, we've got all of the trees and buildings and stuff like that that's in the way. Do we want to introduce all of you guys so that we all can make sure that we have the opportunity to introduce? So, Miles, if you want to start, we'll just read through the same way, but don't read your questions. Just say who you are and how old you are and what grade you're in. Does that work?
It does. Can you give them like 30 seconds? So
Yes,
taking a quick bathroom break.
Yes, that is totally fine.
All right.
And today we will have...
Miles.
Go ahead.
I'm in second grade.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Yep, and you're age
Hi, this
7.
is Miles. I'm in second grade. Hi, Hi, this is Henry. I'm in kindergarten.
Good.
Hi, this is Catherine. I am 6 years old, and I am kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, James. I'm in first grade. I'm about to be in second grade, and I'm 7. Hi, my name is Bailey. I'm 8 years old, and I'm in second grade.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Chase. I'm 11, and I'm in 5th grade.
Hi, my name is Jada. I'm in 3rd grade, and I'm 9.
Hi, my name is Christian. I'm 10. I'm in 4th grade.
Awesome. And all of you guys have excellent questions that we'll be reading through. John will be starting again in about 3 minutes or so. So like Miles and Henry, if anybody else needs to take a break for a minute before we start, you can go ahead and do that.
Kathy, it's Fred, AB1OC Telebridge. I have the name of your group as the North Virginia School Group. Is that the correct name?
It works fine.
Okay. Is there something better I should do?
The press release that went out was listed as students in Northern Virginia, but we have been using Northern Virginia School Group.
Copy that.
It's the working title, so you can keep it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kathy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Job on the story, by the way. That was great.
Thanks. It's amazing the things you can find in your basement.
Yeah, it was an interesting story, and welcome to all the kids. This is John. Thanks for introducing yourself. That was really interesting. And yeah, Fred, Northern Virginia School Group is what's in the uplink file. So that would be what Commander Cassidy is expecting to hear. So that's what we should use.
Copy that, John. Thanks. AB1OC.
Okay, I have about a minute and 12 seconds, and we'll start the formal program. So That was a really good story. I would have loved to have been that possum. I'd be curious to see a possum hanging up from his tail instead of down from his tail. That was an interesting thought. Okay, so we're getting very, very close, and I think we'll go ahead and I'll get ready here to start reading things. Conference operator, you can go ahead and you can open the lines for start recording, and we'll go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. This is John Clute, K4SQC, and I'm your ARIS radio moderator for today's ARIS, Amateur Radio on the International Space Station Contact. I'm speaking to you from my home in Atlanta, Georgia. What makes this contact a little different from the usual ARIS contact is everyone involved in this contact will be speaking from their home as we all shelter in place. Through the help of the amateur radio volunteers and the crew on the ISS, we hope to soon establish a radio contact with the International Space Station as it flies more than 200 miles above the Earth over New Hampshire. This contact will be performed using the Amateur Radio Telebridge Network, a worldwide network of amateur radio ground stations that enable students to contact the ISS. We have a short video courtesy of the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL, which will explain the role of amateur radio in what is about to happen. Steve, you want to go ahead and roll the video, please?
Hi, my name is Ruth.
And my name is Chris.
You must be pretty excited to talk directly with astronauts on the International Space Station today. While we're waiting for the space station to come over your portion of the sky, let's talk a little bit about how it's going to happen. Of course, Mission Control is in contact with astronauts all the time, using a big radio with lots of fancy equipment.
However, we're going to be using something very different today. We are going to use ham or amateur radio to talk directly to the International Space Station.
When most people hear the word radio, they think of a music radio station, but it's so much more than that. Radio actually refers to the unseen energy that transmits all sorts of signals using electromagnetic waves. At first, people learned how to send signals like Morse code, and then they discovered that you can send so much more, like data, computer signals, and even TV.
Maybe you don't realize it, but you use radio every day. Maybe you watched the TV this morning, or you texted your friends, or maybe even you check social media like Twitter or Instagram.
Let's travel back to space for a minute. Since the beginning of the space age, humans have sent many spacecraft out into the universe. These range from the Hubble Space Telescope, orbiting the Earth daily, and the Curiosity rover exploring Mars. We've even sent a long-distance messenger, the Voyager 1, who has traveled outside of our solar system.
Whether it's capturing a great picture of a far-off galaxy or conducting experiments on the space station, radio has to do with all of these. And today, you're going to be using ham radio. Now you might be wondering, what exactly is ham radio?
Amateur or ham radio is a service and a hobby where operators can talk with people around their neighborhoods, their cities, their country, and even around the world. Amateur radio operators require a radio license from the government. They're not that hard to get. I have one. My call sign is KM4LAO.
And mine is KD8YBJ. Our call signs are a way of identifying who we are to other operators. This lets everyone know that we have the proper license to using the radios.
As amateur radio operators, or hams as we are often called, we can talk with others about basically whatever we want, often science or some new radio gadget that we are interested in.
Let's focus back to the space station and your contact today. Many of the astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the space station are licensed ham radio operators. That's why your operators today can contact them. The people here, as well as the astronauts, are licensed to talk to each other, and you are allowed to talk over to their radio.
For our conversation today, we'll need an amateur radio station on the ground, either in this location or somewhere else around the world. We'll also need a radio in the space station.
Anyone SS.
You can hear the calls come. This is November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, the International Space Station, over.
On the space station, the radio transceiver is connected to an amateur radio antenna mounted on the outside. One of these antennas will be used today during our contact.
For our side of the contact, we need a good-sized antenna, a signal amplifier, something to make our signal stronger, and a rotator for turning our antenna. We have to keep our antenna pointed right at the International Space Station. And remember, it's moving across the sky and fast.
To aim the antenna properly, we need to track the path of the space station exactly. NASA uses complex systems to track the path of the space station and other orbiting objects.
The satellite tracking program we are using works out a complicated set of mathematics to provide the orbital location of the space station moment by moment as it moves through space. This information is sent into the computer that controls the antenna rotator, which moves the antenna to follow the space station. Maybe some of you have seen or worked with robotics. That's pretty cool stuff. And just like you can program a robot where to go, what to do, and how to get there, you can also program a computer to tell an antenna how to track the space station across the sky.
You know, it took a lot of planning to get this contact. Several weeks ago, the ISS operations team had to figure out when the space station's orbit would pass over this location. Then, they had to talk with the planners at NASA's Johnson Space Center. The crew's time is pretty full, so they were able to find a time that could work for the crew members' schedules. Once they found times that would work both in space and here on the ground, the host organized this contact. And in just a few minutes, you'll be hearing and talking to the astronauts.
Well, it's almost time for your contact. It will be exciting, so good luck with it.
Well, thank you. And I hope that was a interesting discussion of what we're about to see. IRIS is an international program supported by amateur radio operators from around the world. Some member organizations of IRIS are the American Radio Relay League, the Worldwide AMSAT Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation, as well as space agencies, including the Canadian Space Agency, the European Space Agency, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Association, and Roscosmos, the Russian Space Agency. The amateur radio station that will establish this contact with the ISS is AB1OC, located in the home of Fred Kemmerer. Fred is in Hollis, New Hampshire. Fred, please tell us a little bit about your station and how you will handle today's contact with the ISS.
Thank you, John, and welcome everybody to our exciting contact today. We'll be speaking with Chris Cassidy on the ISS. Chris is an amateur radio operator. His call sign is Kilo Fox 5, Kilo Delta Radio. We'll call the ISS using the ISS call sign, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. As John mentioned, I'm located here in southeast New Hampshire. We have a radio station here with 3 radio towers that allows us to contact folks worldwide and in space on a variety of different frequencies. The tower we'll be using today for our contact is a 40-foot tower. We have an IP camera pointed at it, which you've been watching on the live stream. And we'll be using computers to steer the antennas and have it track the ISS as it makes its pass across the sky. The ISS is in low Earth orbit and will only be visible for about 10 minutes. It'll come over the horizon, pass overhead with a maximum elevation at about 62 degrees, which is quite high, and then set at the end. Our contact will begin shortly, and students, good luck, and don't forget to say over when you're done asking each of your questions. John, this is AB1OC. Back to you.
Thank you, Fred. We do have about 6 minutes now until our contact time, and as Fred said, today's contact is with astronaut Commander Chris Cassidy, KF5KDR, who will be using the ISS call sign NA1ISS. We've just seen what the ARIS contact looks like from the ground, and we do have additionally a short video with astronaut Tim Peake, KG5BVI, that explains an ARIS contact from the astronaut's point of view. Interesting tidbit. Look closely and you'll notice that the radio appears to be and actually is floating inside of the ISS. Steve, you want to go ahead and roll the Tim Peake video, please?
NA1SS, this is N2SJ, over. NA2SJ from NA1SS for scheduled contact.
Hi everyone, I'm Tim Peake and welcome aboard the International Space Station, where we're orbiting Earth 16 times every day. One of the most rewarding activities that some astronauts undertake on orbit is to talk to schools using the space station's ham radio. Now these are events that are planned by ARIS, which is a worldwide group of amateur radio volunteers who are dedicated to introducing young people and students to science, technology, engineering and mathematics. Now this is the equipment here in the Columbus laboratory, which consists of a handheld radio, a headset, and we also have a ham video unit. Now as the International Space Station orbits above your location, a radio link is established between the ISS and your school. Now because we're travelling at nearly 18,000 miles per hour, which is an incredible 25 times the speed of sound, we usually get about 9 or 10 minutes of good radio contact before losing the signal. So about 5 minutes before the scheduled start time of the contact, I come into the Columbus laboratory and configure the radio so that I'm on the correct channel. And sometimes I'll set up the ham video too. Just before the predicted time, I'll begin to start calling the school using the standard amateur radio calling techniques. For example, if the call sign of your school was GB4 Fun, I would say Golf Bravo 4, Foxtrot Uniform November. This is Golf Bravo 1 Sierra Sierra, listening and standing by. Now at your school, the radio operator will be listening for my call, but may also transmit and try to call me as well. You'll probably have a much more powerful transmitter on the ground than we have up here on board, so I'm likely to hear you before you hear me. Then, once we can hear each other, then comes the best bit, which is actually talking to the students and answering the questions. Once I've answered all the questions, we use the remaining time to say goodbye to each other and end the connection. I'll then spend a few minutes configuring the radio back into a rebroadcast mode, and then I'll go back to my day job, which is of course doing science on board the International Space Station. ARIS is a brilliant opportunity for astronauts to talk to school pupils. It's really rewarding to hear how excited the students are when they're talking to somebody up here in space. And it's a true privilege to be able to inspire our next generation of scientists and engineers through amateur radio.
Disconnect now.
Okay, that was the radio noise that you heard. We'll be listening to that until the ISS makes contact. "30 seconds. "15 seconds. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Any copy? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Any copy? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Any copy? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Any copy? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Any copy? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Any copy? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Any copy? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Any copy? Chris, if you can hear me, I'm going to try the backup channel, AB1OC. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. Over. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? Over. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? Over. Chris, I'm back on the primary if you can hear me. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? Over. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? Over. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? Over.
Fred, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm on the phone.
It's still there. It's not. I don't think it's up and going right now, though.
Okay, so the problem is on the ISS side. Then are they have their radios on and they're on the appropriate channel?
They're saying nothing shows on the screen. They're having a hard time getting both of them to turn back on, or they can't get to turn on.
They can't get the radio to turn on. Is that correct?
They cannot get the radio to turn on.
Copy that. All right, have them keep working at it. We'll keep calling. We may be able to salvage this. We'll be here, okay?
All right. They said they reported they're still going to be working it. But do you have this number just in case you have any input?
Yeah, okay, I've got it. Hang on a minute. Let me just write it down here before you hang up. Okay, yes, we've got it. We'll keep trying until the ISS disappears, and hopefully we'll sort it out, okay?
All right. Thank you much.
Thank you for the update. We appreciate it. Bye. Okay, folks, that was the Huntsville Operations Center for NASA. Apparently they're having difficulties getting the radio turned on the ISS. We're going to go ahead and continue to call in hopes that they'll sort it out. And if for some reason things don't work out, I'm sure the NASA team will help us reschedule our contact. And as John mentioned, this is an experiment. And, of course, experiments don't always work the first time. So with that, we'll continue to call. This is AB1OC. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra and November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie? November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Any copy on Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie?
Alpha Bravo 1 Oscar Charlie. This is November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. How do you read me? Over.
We copy you real well, Chris, and thank you for sorting out the issues up there in space and for doing the contact with us today. Are you ready for the students' questions? Over.
I'm ready for the questions. Over. Sorry about the delay.
That's all right. Go ahead, students. Kathy, go ahead and ask your questions. This is AB1OC. Over to you. Kathy, we do not have the student audio. Chris, this is AB1OC. Are you still with us there? Stand by.
I'm still with you, and I have the list of questions. I can just go right into them. If I think that might be logistically easier given the time restrictions that we now have. Over.
All right, let's give the students one last chance. Students, ask away. All right, okay, first question, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question from Miles. What does the sun look like from outer space? Good question, Miles. The sun is the same exact appearance that we see on Earth. It's the same size and the same intensity, although we don't have the protection of the atmosphere, so it's very, very bright for us. Next question from Henry. How comfortable is it to sleep in space? We actually sleep very well. We float inside our sleeping bags and we tie our sleeping bags to the wall. And once you get used to not having a pillow for your head, it's very comfortable to sleep here.
Hey, Chris, stand by one.
Standing by, over.
I think we have the students. Catherine, are you there? If so, answer your question.
Hi, this is Catherine. What's the one thing you want to eat when you get back to Earth? Over.
Catherine, the thing I want to eat when I come back to Earth is homemade chocolate chip cookies. Over.
Hi, I'm Jade. I heard that says a red, yellow, and blue. Can you see those colors in space when you look at the stars? Over.
It was difficult to hear that question, but I heard the word stars, and the stars look very similar to what we see on Earth. Except they don't have a twinkle to them. They're a nice bright dot. Sorry if I didn't answer exactly the question, but I couldn't hear. Over.
Hi, my name is Bailey. Besides your family, what do you miss most while being in space? Over.
Bailey, the thing I miss most from being in space is the smells of Earth. The smell of the outside, the smell of fresh air, the smell of the ocean. Those are the things we don't have here on the space station. Over.
Hi, my name is Chase. What are your thoughts on our COVID-19 situation right now? Does the Earth look differently over the last 3 months now that many people are inside and not creating pollution? Over.
Good question, Chase. Does not look any different from
Oh, okay, folks, it looks like we've lost the ISS. Obviously, we had a few little glitches there, but we did get in a few questions. And how about a nice round of applause for Chris helping us try to talk to the ISS today. Go ahead, kids.
Thank you.
Back to you. This is AB1OC.
Well, although it didn't turn out quite the way we had intended, I am glad that we were ultimately able to talk to Chris and we were able to get a few of the questions that the students had been practicing in. I think it was we'll call it a semi-successful contact. As part of the preparations for an ARIS contact, we asked the students to write a short introduction of themselves to the astronauts. The North Virginia School Group wrote in part, "Our school year was ended on March 13th, and we have been home learning many things using distance learning methods. We have been learning how to get along in small spaces with little contact with the rest of the community. We are learning very quickly how it must feel to be on the ISS. On behalf of the international volunteer teams of ARIS, including the amateur radio satellite corporations around the world, the ARL, NASA, and the other sponsoring space agencies, this is John, amateur radio operator K4SQC in Atlantic, sending my greetings to all of you in traditional amateur radio terms, 73 and best wishes." Operator, you may go ahead and stop the recording. And with this, we are going to terminate the call. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.